Hi, I'm Daniel Nyman. On behalf of the Forum for Healthcare Strategists, as well as our colleagues at IQVIA, welcome and thank you for joining us for driving referrals through smarter physician engagement. Reaching physicians at the right moment with the right message is no longer optional. It's essential for driving referrals, improving marketing ROI. Today, you'll learn how the marketing team at Johns Hopkins Medicine uses behavioral data to power smarter, more personalized campaigns that go beyond opens and clicks. One note before we begin. If you'd like to ask a question, please enter it into the question and answer pane located on the bottom of your screen at any time. Our panelists will respond to as many questions as they can in the time that we have. With that, I'll turn the program over to Stacy Compty, Director of Client Success at IQVIA Health System Solutions, who will be leading today's discussion. Stacy?
Thank you so much, Daniel. And thank you to everybody taking time out of your day to join us. Good morning or good afternoon, wherever you are in the country. Before we get started, one thing I want to do is I want to make sure that I get time to introduce my lovely partners from Johns Hopkins Medicine. So you can see here we have Kathleen and Azmina here. Kathleen is the Director of Marketing in the Washington, D.C. region. She provides strategic marketing, including research, planning, and execution in a highly competitive and growing market. She has led the opening and multi-year marketing for the Johns Hopkins Proton Therapy Center, which is going to be one of the topics that we discuss today. I also have Azmina. Azmina is an Assistant Director of Marketing in the Baltimore region for Johns Hopkins Medicine. She leads strategic marketing initiatives that support clinical priorities, drive patient volume across service lines, in addition to physician outreach and marketing. Azmina collaborates with cross-functional teams to develop data-informed campaigns that align with institutional goals and service line priorities. And I'm Stacy Compty. I'm so excited to be here today. My role at IQVIA is I lead up our client success organization here. I've spent about 17 years of my career supporting health systems in the areas of patient acquisition, patient retention, and provider relationships and communications. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Azmina to give what probably isn't necessary in terms of introducing who Johns Hopkins is, but going to give Azmina some time to talk about their system and their mission.
Thank you, Stacy. Hi, everyone. So excited to also be here. Let's see. So I'm not trying to brag when I say this, but I'm sure that many of you have heard of Johns Hopkins that are on this webinar right now. But just for some clarification, the Johns Hopkins University and the Johns Hopkins Health System are two completely separate entities, and the two of them are married then by the School of Medicine. So Kathleen and I support marketing efforts for the Johns Hopkins Health System as well as for the School of Medicine, so not for the university. Some fun facts about our health system. So Johns Hopkins Medicine is consistently ranked among the top hospitals in the US among a variety of different platforms. I'm sure many of you saw the US News and World Report rankings that came out this morning, actually. There's a lot of legacy behind our name and brand, and while we're known throughout the world, we still experience the same obstacles that many, many other health systems, whether academic or community, are faced with when it comes to marketing our services, specifically to physicians. So Hopkins is large and diverse, as many of you probably know, but some still think that we only have one hospital, the main hospital located in downtown Baltimore. And while that is still the mothership hospital, we have now grown to 6 hospitals across the Baltimore and DC region. We have almost 40 outpatient sites and 6 different ambulatory surgery centers where we perform outpatient care. We're continuing to grow that regional footprint in both of those metro areas, in addition to our pediatric hospitals in Florida. So the large scale of our system really gives us the complexity, but also the opportunity when it comes to physician marketing. So while we're a global name, we're also deeply local in our communities and try to serve our communities as best as we can. And then quickly touching on the mission. So like many other academic medical centers, we have a tripartite mission, which focuses really heavily on patient care, research, and education. We're not just known for our patient care, but for advancing medicine as a whole throughout the country. And although, for our industry, these are kind of turbulent times, especially when it comes to research, we're still very research driven and offer clinical trials in nearly every specialty. And then quickly about the team that Kathleen and I work on. So we are on a team that we call ourselves the service line marketing team. So we have the opportunity to build the marketing strategy around a myriad of different clinical areas. We wear a lot of hats, so we market for consumers, but also physicians, in addition to supporting reputation and institutional efforts. And we're somewhat divided by region, but we still work very collaboratively as a system with each other on enterprise-wide efforts. So I'll hand it over to Stacy to talk about IQVIA.
Absolutely. And we are a little bit of a tale of two cities in that I'm sure you have heard of Johns Hopkins Medicine. I'm not so sure that maybe you've heard of IQVIA or understand who IQVIA does and what we do. So we are a global leader in healthcare data and a national leader in physician data. We have over 90,000 employees in 100 countries. And we are proud to work with the vast majority of U.S. News and World Report's top-ranked hospitals. We support health systems by providing data-centric solutions to support patient acquisition and provider relationships. And we've been partnered with Johns Hopkins Medicine since 2017, supporting their strategic priorities around referral, reputation, U.S. News and World Report, and other physician outreach needs. So before we dive into the specifics on the case study we're going to kind of go through today, I want to kind of talk about where we are today as marketers in the health system space. So about a year ago, I sat in a fantastic presentation hosted by NRC and Tidelands Health out of South Carolina. And they popped this slide up on the screen, and my eyes, like all of us, anytime you have data on the screen, your eyes immediately go in 7 different places, and I immediately latched onto the slide. So the thing that really kind of perked my interest with this slide is, as healthcare marketers, looking at this question, how important would the following factors be to you when selecting a facility? And looking at all these factors, and I'm going, as healthcare marketers, how much do we really have within our control and how much is really out of our control? So we can't control if our hospital accepts their insurance. We can't necessarily control if they're conveniently located to that patient, if they've had a bad experience in the past, or if friends and family have faced any of those other challenges. But the things that stuck out to me were really the reputation of the hospital and your doctor recommends. And those are 2 things that marketing really does have an impact on. But kind of understanding that only those 2 things, speak far more about engagement with physicians than it does speak about engagement with consumers. So in looking at this, this was a great way to start this conversation, because this is the type of work that we do with Johns Hopkins every single day. We're working on them with U.S. News and World Report and ensuring that their reputation is well known and well socialized across the country, and also ensuring that the doctors that are their constituency for referrals know of Johns Hopkins Hospital, or know of Johns Hopkins offerings, know of their hospitals and clinic locations, know where they should be sending those patients when applicable. And that's extremely important for multiple reasons, but one of the top reasons is the referral piece that I just spoke about. So we know that physicians have a very high influence with consumers. So if you think of anybody on the call today and how many of you have received a specialty referral at some time of your life, we are a very healthcare centric and savvy group on this call today. So we know where the best care is available for us. So if we get a cardiology referral, we might know that that might be at our hospital, at a hospital across the street, and we may get that referral from our PCP or from a specialist and say, you know what, that's great, but I think I'm going to maybe look at over here. But when we consider the run-of-the-mill patient that's receiving those referrals from their trusted care provider, it's very likely that they're going to go exactly where the physician tells them to go. So I think that as we look at our marketing strategies, and I think we've done that, we've always done this, we tend to look at patient acquisition and provider communications as 2 different silos. Some teams are even built that way. Like, I don't work on the consumer side, I work on the provider side, or vice versa. But really, when you look at how we're looking at providers and how much influence and stewardship, and really being the point of authority for a lot of their patients is, you really realize very quickly that provider marketing is probably one of the ultimate aspects of your patient acquisition strategy. So speaking of strategy, I'm going to turn it back over to Kathleen and Azmina to talk about their physician marketing strategy.
So I'm going to touch on some of the areas where we experience both challenges, but also opportunities to market our services, and how we deal with some of these things that Stacy mentioned in our organization. So we have a really highly competitive environment we're operating as a whole, all of us, in the most competitive healthcare environment we've ever seen. And in such a concentrated area like Baltimore and DC, which are our primary markets, at least for adult care, they're extremely competitive. And part of that competition can be attributed to the high density of health systems in the area. To name some of our large competitors, we have MedStar Health System, Inova, University of Maryland, lot of regional community hospitals, tons of independent and private practice as well. And a lot of those are now offering overlapping services and programs. So patients and referring providers have a lot more options now than they used to, right? To choose where to send their patient. And it has been for some time, and we can't rest on our brand recognition anymore or our reputation. We really have to do more to garner referrals, and we have to be really thoughtful and targeted in those approaches. So again, academic medical centers like ours, we're not locally competing anymore. We're competing nationwide for some services, complex cases, and for referrals. But at the same time, we're seeing that regional community health systems are leveling up, right? So they're investing in data, access, physician alignment, which in some ways we're only limited to big hospital systems like Johns Hopkins, which also creates additional competition. And it's a lot of noise for the physicians, right? For the referring providers. So they're hearing from everybody now. Their attention is extremely limited, which means that our outreach has to be smarter, right? More personalized and more strategic to break through to them with our messaging. And we realized as a marketing team and as a system that we needed to be more intentional on how we differentiate ourselves and how we position ourselves to physicians, right? So, going beyond the brand recognition, which is one of the reasons why we invested in the program that we're going to be talking to you about today. And then I'll move on to some of our strategic approach. So considering how much specialty care Johns Hopkins is comprised of, physician marketing's always been a really big part of the work that we do. But given the competition that I just talked about and all the noise in the market, we've really honed in on physician marketing as a strategic priority. So we really started to focus on building a strategy that's much more personalized, using campaigns such as this, data-driven and responsive versus mass outreach. And I think in today's environment, physicians expect relevance, they expect value and ease, and reaching them really requires a layered and targeted approach that aligns with their specific needs and preferences. Just like we try to tailor personalized care to patients, we're almost doing the exact same thing for physicians, making sure that our approach to them is very tailored and personalized. So the next slide, I've given the what and the why so far, so I'm going to move on to the how. So this is certainly an evolving process and strategy for us, and I think we're all learning as we go. But ultimately, our first step in evaluating each service line is to uncover the unique physician angle. So whether it's tied to, this practice has new technology, this practice has great clinical outcomes or access improvements, whatever the case is, we really try to delve in and identify the key differentiators for that group. And as we've learned over the years, to have that successful evaluation, relationship building is what we've found to be at the core of that. We prioritize our relationships with our clinical partners first and foremost in all of the work that we do. So we're constantly working with both our physicians, the service line leaders, the administrators, the practice managers, the operations team, the list goes on to really understand what matters to each group, to then come up with that tailored and personalized approach like I was talking about on the last slide. So we are the marketing experts, but the clinical experts and us really need to align. And that's what we found that creates the most successful campaigns in the end. So I'll give you an example of something that I came across in the last couple of months. So, like I said, we work with all these different teams and in certain divisions. So we were working with cardiology on a campaign in a new region. We were growing a new program in an area where we don't have a hospital, but we were trying to bring brand awareness to that specific area for a couple different services. And a lot of people were like, okay, well, we need to tell the consumer, the people that have this cardiology issue, that we're now in this area and we're offering these services. We talked to the chief of cardiology about it, and He said, no, that's not what we're doing. The number one customer is the primary care physician. That's who we need to talk to ultimately. Going back to Stacy's point before, the majority of the time you're going to go where your doctor tells you to go, right? Like whether or not you know you have an issue or have a specific healthcare need. And so that kind of like changed our train of thought into like, this is, there is a consumer component to this, but there is a huge physician component that we really need to pay attention to, even if we think it's a consumer friendly topic. So once we have the information that we need, we start building the strategy for that specific area of focus. So in building that, we usually begin with the value. What does the service line offer that matters to referring providers? And then who are the specialties that are most likely to refer to this provider? And we don't stop there. So we try to look at patterns, pain points, and preferences, like I said, all going back to that tailored approach. And finally, we try to stay really laser focused on managing a term that we call leakage. So I'm not sure how many of you in the audience are familiar with that, but we consider leakage referrals that should stay in our system, but leave our system for a variety of different reasons. And although a big portion of Kathleen and I's marketing focus is specialty care, we still have a huge primary care division within Johns Hopkins that we market to. And when those providers refer outside the system, we try to understand the details of why and why those referrals leave and how to bring them back into our system, and then use that smaller scale strategy and apply it externally to physicians that aren't within our own system. And I would say the main takeaways from this slide are that physician marketing is innately different, right, from consumer marketing. So we've learned through some of these campaigns that needs to be highly targeted and timely. We can't waste physicians' time. It's really nuanced, right? We can't say like, you're the best anymore. You need to provide evidence on why you're the best, because they're experts in that field too, right? So they know and they can distinguish the difference. And building trust to ensure that the providers trust that Johns Hopkins will, take care of their patient, follow up, but also that they won't lose their patient, which is something that we're hearing a lot in the field is, big bad Hopkins, I don't want to lose my patients in the black hole. So we really try to support the clinicians and the clinical teams in stewarding the relationship with the referring physician. All right, hand it back over to Stacy.
Tales all the time. I was muted. So what does your physician marketing look like today? So we work with over 100 hospitals and health systems across the country. And the vast majority of these orgs are focusing their HCP marketing on sending newsletters to build awareness and preference, to support reputation efforts around US News and World Report, and then also assisting other departments by driving recruitment and CME activities. So email continues to be a leading strategy based on the real estate that exists to have a compelling dialogue, because as Mina pointed out earlier, we can't rest on reputation anymore. You can't just tell a physician we're the best. It's just not enough for a physician audience. So in healthcare marketing today, we do a really effective job of communicating to physicians when it's important to us. So this is the left side of the screen. We send those newsletters, we're getting in front of them when we have content, which is hard to come by in the physician space, but when we do have content that we can get in front of people. But the question that remains is, where is our message when it's important to the PCP or to the HCP or the PCP? When they're making critical decisions about the next step in their patient's care, the best procedure, and to those probably most pertinent to everybody in the room today, what health system is going to be the best for them? So thought leaders like Johns Hopkins Hospital are working with us in things like AIM trigger programs. And so we're going to be talking about our AIM trigger programs today. AIM trigger programs allow us to observe HCP research behavior on the web and then be able to trigger specific content to that physician within 24 hours. So that really allows Johns Hopkins Medicine to further invest in a service line, ensure that they have a very contextually aligned and timely message in front of that physician. And that's what we're going to focus our energy talking about today, is really moving away or enhancing our push strategies with pull strategies that allow us to figure out when the time is going to be best for that physician to get that message. So how does this actually work? So again, IQVIA is a very large organization. We have a fantastic provider research ecosystem. So that's over 5,800 physician interested sites. So think of things like journal sites, where we can actually observe the behavior of physicians, knowing who those physicians are by their NPI. So we can identify that Dr. Jane Smith here, who is a radiation oncologist, is researching a specific diagnosis and has that activity date of maybe yesterday's date in this case. So then what the AIM Trigger program is able to do is it's able to trigger Dr. Jane Smith into the JHM proton therapy drip program within 24 hours of that research behavior. So again, we're assuming that that physician is online at that time, researching for a specific patient at that time, trying to figure out their next course of action. And then we're able to capitalize on that interest and provide information specific to Johns Hopkins Medicine within 24 hours. So to kind of go a little bit deeper in this, you can see Dr. Smith is consulting her patient on a thoracic cancer diagnosis. Her patient is currently in chemotherapy and has already gone through radiation. Part of her patient's left lung has been removed. So traditional photon therapy would expose her heart and spine. So Dr. Smith is going to go into those professional research sites to investigate treatment options and recent studies. And while researching, she comes across an article on a journal site related to proton therapy, which spares vital organs from exit dose radiation, specifically in the case of something like thoracic cancer. So then she lands on this journal. On this journal page, you can see how our AIM readers actually look for contextually aligned content, looking not only to make sure that it's the right type of content, but it's also treatment-based. Identifies her as somebody who's applicable for the campaign, pulls her in, and then that's going to trigger her entry into the program, receiving that first email within 24 hours. So essentially, when we look at how this all comes together, this can also be enhanced by other things as well. So we want to make sure that we're getting in front of these physicians at times that are impactful and making sure that we're having a consistent dialogue. So that first email may be about detailing the benefits of proton therapy in general. So she's receiving that message. Then maybe a couple days later, she might see a display ad that Johns Hopkins Medicine has in market also around proton therapy. Then a few days later, she's receiving a second trigger email. That email could be an email providing a proton therapy lung cancer case study. So something relatively specific to what she was looking at. And then not to mention that in addition to all these things that we're putting into place that, kind of the digital world can allow us to kind of put in and set it and forget it, we also know that we have highly engaged, very talented liaisons that exist within our health systems that we can provide this data to them as well. We can say, here are the physicians that are researching this, prioritize these people on your call list, call them about proton therapy, get in front of them now, and really allow those boots on the ground to extend the work that we're doing in marketing. Then that physician's going to receive AIM trigger email number 3. That's going to be FAQs about proton therapy for lung cancer. She might then see a social ad around the same content, and then kind of rounding out the AIM trigger program, getting that last email featuring the expertise of the proton therapy cancer treatments provided at Johns Hopkins Medicine. And what this has done is it's allowed us to have a really highly contextual, highly timely, very clinical dialogue with this physician. So when we get to the point where we're talking about push marketing and we're talking about getting in front of people around US News and World Report, we created kind of this dialogue and this highly aligned messaging to them. So when they're asked who is the best in this space, they're going to remember again that we were able to help them, that Johns Hopkins Medicine was able to help them decide to potentially what to do with a patient at a time that was kind of a time in question for them. So turning over to talk about the Johns Hopkins Medicine specific AIM programs and case studies.
Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today. I'm going to take a little bit of a deeper dive into the AIM trigger campaign for proton therapy as the case study. So just a couple of highlights here. Johns Hopkins opened its proton therapy center a few years ago in Washington, D.C. And at the time of the opening, proton therapy was a relatively new technology and wasn't really well understood. There was a lot of skepticism about using proton therapy among referring physicians, and that included surgeons and medical oncologists who typically refer to us. There was also minimal research on what differentiates proton therapy from photon therapy and why and when you should refer a patient. So we really wanted to get in the market with something to create awareness and educate physicians so that we could ease that referral process. Azmina?
So my experience with the AIM Trigger program was not on proton therapy, but on hepatobiliary and pancreatic surgery. So our content streams focused on pancreatic cancer and on liver cancer. So some of the main differences between this campaign and Kathleen's campaign, just to showcase that it works for multiple service lines, is that unlike proton being a new service, pancreatic and liver cancer have been existing and around for a long time, especially at Johns Hopkins. We were focusing on multiple diseases and multiple conditions within the liver and the pancreas. And advances being made in surgery, and there's rising competition for these. So you don't necessarily have to go to a huge AMC anymore. You can get these services in your community. So really making that stand out. We were targeting a national audience with our campaign, and we wanted to educate. We had some really good content on some new treatment options and wanted to educate physicians, but also use it as a way to potentially capture referrals. So I would say some of the key takeaways between the comparison of our programs was that regardless of the differences in the services or the target audiences, the common thread across the campaigns was the importance of building the physician awareness and ensuring that we are top of mind for referrals. And then we also found that aligning the messaging to what's most relevant to the physicians, whether it's a clinical interest, a current patient need, that is crucial for the engagement piece. And then finally, we also recognize that we needed to go beyond the typical outreach, right? So physicians aren't always going to act after a single email or a call. So as Stacy showed you kind of like the timeline and the life cycle of the Trigger campaign, it's building a longer, more meaningful dialogue. And we found that to be much more engaging and much more resonating with our messages.
So the proton therapy AIM Trigger campaign, it was very successful. Go through some details with you all. You know, clearly it's a new technology, it's a new service, it's a new location. We wanted to drive awareness and highlight effectiveness. And, you know, as with all marketing efforts, we want to be the provider of choice, the location of choice for our region. And we really wanted to garner those referrals and increase those referrals to us. And, you know, I had mentioned that the challenge with proton therapy is wasn't well understood or well known. It's also very highly specialized, so it's complicated to communicate. Without going into too much detail, the difference between photon therapy and proton therapy is that proton therapy goes straight into the tumor and stops at the tumor. There's no exit dose of radiation. So it is best used for tumors that are close to vital structures. All brain cancers, a lot of lung cancers that would involve the heart or the spine, left breast cancers that involve the heart or the lung, abdominal cancers, prostate cancer where the bladder and or the spine might be exposed. So really, really specific targeting that we needed to do. We decided to do the 6-month campaign, speaking to physicians who are researching treatments and diagnosis, and provide them with the content related to proton therapy targeting the Mid-Atlantic. For this campaign, we did 4 streams. We focused on the 4 different disease sites we were treating the most at the time, which were CNS, breast, prostate, and thoracic. And if you do the math correctly, that does mean we had to produce 12 pieces of content, 3 pieces of content for each stream. And I'll talk to that in a little bit. At the same time, our liaisons were going out and visiting referring physicians, taking our physicians, our proton specialists, out to meet with them. And one of the things we were able to do, because IQVIA could provide us with physician level data about who's engaging in our campaign, our doctors, it was a new center. their templates weren't completely full. So we were able to provide them with that physician data, physician names. They were able to review the names, determine who the high value targets would be, and then conduct outreach to doctors they knew or they knew of. Next slide. And so what our trigger campaign looked like is I think Stacy went over this a little bit, so I'll just touch base on this. The opening email was a general email about the benefits of proton therapy. We had a video that talked about the differences between photon therapy and proton therapy, and really kind of that higher level understanding. And then there was an echo for that. And then the next piece of content we did would be the case study. And again, one for each one of these for each disease site. And the case study really looked at a specific instance of how proton therapy was used and how effective it was. And then and then there was another echo, and then we ended with an email of basic FAQs, just in case there was something we'd missed, something that wasn't explained well, to give referring physicians an opportunity to to really try to understand the technology and what we were doing. And I will say that the echoes are so important in these campaigns. I was just looking at another another e-blast that we done with IQVIA earlier today, and the echoes increased our open rates by about 30 to 40%. On any given day, a doctor's busy and may be on vacation, maybe in the OR, maybe doing something else, but then they get the echo in a couple of days and they click on the echo and engage with us. So it was really valuable part of the solution. Next slide. So I'm just going to get into the weeds a little bit here because it's content, interacting with physicians. Content is so important, and making it valuable to them. But for us as marketers, it can be very time intensive to produce. Like I said, we produced 12 pieces. So we found some efficiencies I thought I'd share. We decided that for the first contact, the first email, that we wanted to create something that really represented Hopkins and represented our brand and reputation. So we created very high production value videos that they featured our medical director. They talked about proton therapy. We had some nice animations that showed where what organs were spared using proton therapy versus what would have been reached for photon therapy, and that did very well. And then the case study was really just 4 paragraphs. It was a paragraph on why proton therapy is appropriate for this type of cancer, and then what the patient presented with, the patient's treatments, and what the patient outcomes were. And then the FAQ that we ended with was pretty simple to produce. We talked with the doctors about what the top questions were that they were being asked by referring physicians, and then we created an FAQ and we just altered it by disease site, putting in very specific things that related to that particular type of cancer. It is difficult getting physicians to participate sometimes, even those who want to participate. And, I certainly am not averse to standing outside a consultation room or tracking a doctor down to make sure they've seen the email. But, for those who are interested in this, I would recommend that you do an inventory of what content you have and what content you need, and you start to create the content before you're ready to execute the campaign. These 12 pieces of content took us about 4 months to determine what we were going to do, develop, review, finalize before they were ready to launch. Next slide.
Yep, I think just one thing I'll add there,
Okay.
Kathleen, is that since this program has launched, we've worked to provide much more consultant nature to the development of the creative. So a lot of times we'll actually work with the health system now to say, like, I know it's a lot, but we've done a lot of these programs and these are the types of content that work really well. Here's our recommended topics. Here are places on your website that we think has really good content that you should be using here. So I think we've made some great strides. So as Kathleen and Azmina kind of embark on their next AIM Trigger programs that I think they'll give you a little insight into, there will be a lot more strategic support in terms of helping them get to that content quicker.
Thanks. And then in terms of engagement and performance of the campaign, because proton therapy is so new, we wanted to make sure that a lot of the doctors understood the technology, including primary care physicians. Our region, most of our residents have PCPs that interact with specialists, so we felt it was important to include those doctors. So we went to a wide group of physicians. We had about 16,000 that we reached out to. About 50% of the folks we interacted with came from those industry sites that Stacy referred to earlier. The top three specialties we engaged with were PCPs, OBGYNs, and medical oncologists. The PCPs and the OBGYNs, not surprising that they were the top two of the top engagements because there are just more of them. And so even, a lower click-through rate is still, more physicians than a smaller group. What our big win really was our engagement with the medical oncologists. There's a lot of referrals for medical oncology, for radiation, for recurrent tumors, hard to treat tumors, metastatic disease. And so that was great for us. So out of those 16,000 physicians, we were able to engage with about 2,700 subspecialists and then determine the ROI was based on net new referrals and net income. IQVIA helped us helped us do the analysis. I will say it was fairly straightforward. Proton therapy has one charge code and one treatment code. So getting to net income was relatively straightforward compared to a lot of other projects. Next slide. And then what this actually looked like, we were able to get referrals from 31 physicians who engaged with our content. And of those 31, 28 were new physicians to new referral sources to Hopkins in the DC area. And the 31 and the 28 that may look small, but that was really great for us because we only went out with 4 disease sites, and the doctors we engaged with had to have a patient that needed care and that qualified, based on what they could read, that would have been a candidate for proton therapy. So it's really part of this marketing effort was looking for a needle in a haystack. But we were able to get a really great ROI. And this campaign significantly contributed to our net income for the first year we were open.
All right. So some of the key takeaways that we're hoping all of you here will walk away with today is on this slide. So number one, I think everyone would agree if you work in healthcare marketing that building an effective strategy is first and foremost the most important piece of referral marketing. So without the plan, there's no direction. And as we kind of walk through today, it's a lot of work up front and a lot of tailoring, but it's worth it in the end when we can find results like Kathleen just shared with you.
And in terms of referral focus, as Mina mentioned, brand reputation, whether you're Hopkins or a regional health system, isn't enough. It's not enough anymore. It's a very competitive marketplace wherever you happen to be for the most part. And being able to have high quality referral campaigns for physicians and provide them with strong information that they need at the time they're looking is a very big bonus.
The next thing is intelligence. So making sure that we're using credible data sources and vendors that really understand how to target and use that data properly. So as Kathleen mentioned, we were able to glean a lot of insights from this campaign and from the data. And there's just so much information out there online for physicians. And like we said, they don't have time. We have to really capture their attention as quickly as we can with the most valuable information. So partnering with others that really can understand that and prove their validity is really important.
And then in terms of timeliness, one of the things I like the best about this solution is being able to be relevant at the time the physician needs something. So being able to be there when they're looking for the right point of care.
And then the last point on the slide is measurement. So the goal of everything that we do as healthcare marketers is to measure its effectiveness. So we have to have, KPIs in place to not just understand how the campaign is working, but also as a marketing team to validate all of the investments that we're making in these programs and in these campaigns, showing the ROI. And that was one of the great takeaways from these types of campaigns, was the fact that we were able to validate our investment and show our ROI. I think that wraps it up.
Okay, fantastic.
And I would just add that we are engaging, and I'm working with IQVIA on a trigger campaign for cancer services for this year. So looking forward to that.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, we want to open the floor for questions. So we have some questions in the chat that I want to put out there. So let's see. How can this approach be adapted for other service lines or specialties beyond oncology? So I think I can definitely kind of call this out. So we have aim trigger programs that address any service line. So I think Azmina, one of the ones we're talking about doing with you upcoming is cardiology. So it's definitely something that we can utilize in multiple different ways. So typically how I operate with health systems when we kind of approach a conversation is we talk about a specific area of the organization that you're looking to grow, especially in the areas of referrals. We'll sit down and talk about what's most important to that service line. And then we use proprietary taxonomies and success that we've seen in the past with other campaigns to identify the right types of specialists, the right types of keywords that we want to pull out of the content that's being researched online, and then developing that strategy that way. So it can really be adapted for any service line based on the goals. It's just important that we have a dialogue and you can share those goals with us so we can build that program to that specific use case or service line.
And I would just add quickly, so the examples that we shared were oncology driven, one was surgery and one was proton, so very different treatments. But for the cardiology campaign that I'm looking into, it's around heart failure and heart transplantation, so completely different from oncology. And I think one of the key things from the marketing standpoint is to make sure that we have relevant content for the physician. So I know we talked about content a lot throughout the slides, but that's what I would say would be a way to optimize for other types of services.
Yep, and that leads right into the next question that was put in the chat, which I think is fantastic. Question is, how did JHM ensure that email content was educational and not perceived as promotional or salesy?
That's a really good question. And I think it starts with partnering with your physicians and really understanding what it is you're marketing and why it matters to referring physicians. We're lucky because a lot of our doctors also teach because they're faculty, but physicians are great at telling the story if you give them a little bit of time and listen to them, and they'll tell you what's important. So while long format content isn't, what most people use for consumers, it really works for physicians. And then the other thing I would say is, physicians are human beings. They react to different kinds of content like we do. We have videos that perform well. We have long format content, as in 700 to 800 words, that performs well. And then, just kind of the at a glance case studies. So I think having a variety of content that really talks about what it is you do and why it matters how it improves patient health or cures patients from any particular issue, as well as a variety of formats, is a great mix to have.
Yep.
I just want to add one thing to that too. I was talking in one of my slides earlier about identifying the differentiator from the physician angle, and I think that is important in creating the content to ensure that it's not salesy but educational. Is really finding what would be important to that. So if we're targeting messaging to PCPs from cardiology, what does the PCP already know? You know, we don't want to underestimate their intelligence, but what would be helpful to them and what would be helpful to us if they knew who and when and how to refer?
Yeah, and I think that's a great point as well. You know, when we're looking at creating content, you have to be careful, not to sound condescending, because if it's oversimplified, you can kind of turn the physician off. When we work with writers, we always talk about writing to the level of a third-year resident or a PCP, so you capture everyone who could be reviewing, but it still would be relevant for the subspecialist.
Absolutely. I agree with all of those points. These are things that we talk about with our clients every single day. I think another thing to point out just about the creative that you saw that Kathleen popped up on the proton therapy campaign was you saw a lot of infographics and films. Like, we're not using the traditional feel-good stock imagery in these situations. We're really using things that are going to call out the interest of a scientist, which is exactly our audience. So definitely another aspect to point out. Next question, have you found that there's a best day to email physicians and when they will read and open the email? And this is the $1 million question that I get every single time I go through a client business review. So I love this topic. But the answer is really, it's very specific to every health system. So I review client business reviews probably 3 or 4 times a month with health systems all over the country, big, small, academic, regional, etc. And everybody is different. Many years ago, somebody said that Tuesdays were the days to engage with a physician. And I will tell you, in 2 years of doing these client business reviews, I have only had one client business review where Tuesday proved to be the best for open and click-through rate. So I think it just proves that it's important to look specific to your health system. So I don't care when somebody opens health system A's emails. I care when they open Johns Hopkins emails. So when I'm providing recommendations to Kathleen and Azmina as to when we should be sending, I'm going to focus far more on what's working for them and their emails and their cohort of constituency, and far less about how it works for another health system. I know benchmarks are really helpful. I know that they're great directionally, but I think that's one of the benefits of having your own data. And that's one of the great things about email. You can get those from your ESP. So utilizing that data to understand when people are leaning into your messaging and leaning in that way is great. That's also another benefit to having an echo send. I always say, and my entire team that's on this call is going to roll their eyes the minute that they hear me say this, but I'm a big believer in Einstein's definition of insanity, which is doing the same thing twice and expecting different results. So a nugget that I will give you is always send on a different day of week when you're sending your second or echo send. The other thing is using a different subject line and a different pre-header text for that echo send. So that really allows you to leverage 2 different days, potentially 2 different day parts. You might do morning one and afternoon in another, and also utilizing other content that may be different, like the subject line and pre-header, that just allows maybe to trigger a different physician at a different time with a different message. Next question. How did JHM ensure alignment between marketing and clinical teams when crafting campaign messages?
Well, that's a good question. And when Azmina and I work on campaigns, we collaborate with clinicians, with doctors, and with administrators. You can create a great campaign, but if your own folks don't like it, you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot. So, we start with the basics, the ABCs. Is there capacity? Do we have the capability? What's the competition like? And then we meet with the clinical and administrative teams, the operational teams, to find out, what are we doing that's important? Why is it different? Like Azmina was talking, what's the differentiator? How do we manage this? And we develop the messaging together, graphics and typical marketing stuff, the physicians don't approve, but they get to look at the content, they get to approve the content. And if a physician's not comfortable with it, I certainly don't think we'd send it out. It takes longer. It's a little tedious and it can be challenging, but I think the other part of that is we've built really great relationships with our physicians. And, it's not uncommon for a physician to email me, and I'm sure Azmina is the same, and say, hey, I have this great idea. What do you think? Or I just had a physician email me this morning and say, I found this online. Is this something we can do? And I think that level of trust and engagement is really, really valuable in the long run. Azmina, I'm sure you can add to that.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I touched on it in one of the slides earlier too, is we as our marketing team at Hopkins really, really focus on the relationship building. So I think it's a 3-step process. It's building the trust, building the rapport with the physicians and the clinical teams that support them. So it's not just the doctor, right? Because we all know, like, the doctors and the administrators and the ops teams, they all have different perspectives on one topic. So it's gathering all of that information, putting it together, making sense of it, and then basically presenting it back to them and somewhat even selling the idea, right? Like, this is why we think this is a good idea. This is the data that backs it up. This is how it'll help the program that you're trying to grow. And then, we'll put together the asset, whatever it is, like a video, an article, this trigger campaign, and we present it to them and tell them why we think we should do it this way. Of course, they're going to have some feedback, and we take that into account. Like Kathleen said, we wouldn't send it otherwise. But I think building the trust comes first, because then there is less back and forth, and they do begin to, trust that we know what we're doing and we're able to convey their information and what they do in the bedside to others in, a very digestible way and a very easy way. So I think it goes always going back to the relationship.
Absolutely. While we continue to go through questions, I'm just going to pop up a quick QR code to download the case study, just so you guys could take a look at that or take that as a leave behind. But going back to the questions, is the programmatic display only on your own platforms, or is it across external sites? It is on, basically what's happening here is we can identify the audience of people coming into the AIM Trigger program or the service line at large, and can provide those audiences to your agency partner to deploy on your behalf. So essentially the same way that your agency would deploy across the entire web within a display fashion, they would be able to do that, but triggering these same physicians that would either be applicable for this message or that actually received this message. Next question was this geo-targeted to physicians nationally or locally to drive referrals, or both?
It was different for the different campaigns. We wanted to start up Proton a little more slowly because we were just opening and adding physicians. So ours was regional to the Mid-Atlantic.
And the liver and the pancreas campaign was nationally targeted because, as I mentioned, there are existing services, and we did have the capacity, and we know that people will travel for the conditions that we were marketing. So we did broaden the audience for that campaign.
Sounds great. And yeah, that just to extend that across all of the programs that we do, it can be hyper-focused to a specific area or can go nationwide. Another thing we can do is based on the type of specialty, we can open up the geography that way. So if you want to be able to get to specialists nationally, but you want to be able to get PCPs kind of in your referral catchment area, we can toggle that around to ensure that those geographies can be specific to how far you think you can either drive patients or how far it's important for you to drive that kind of awareness. Next question is, who sends the email, the marketing team or IQVIA, and how do you handle canned spam compliance? Is there an opt-in? So we actually handle these emails on behalf of our clients. And so we actually handle all of the provider email on behalf of Johns Hopkins Medicine, but these specific emails for the AIM Trigger program are managed by us. They have to be managed by us because we are triggering and getting that out within 24 hours. So it does really require that very close-knit relationship there. In terms of canned spam, all of the emails within our database are first-party sourced and opted in. So these are physicians that have provided us with these emails through many, many relationships that we have across the web, across these journal sites, where when people sign up, they're providing their email address saying that they want to receive the emails that pertain to their practice and their service line and their specialty, et cetera. We receive all those opt-ins. So all of the physicians that are in our database are completely opt-in and CAN-SPAM compliant. Next question. How did liaisons pull through the content? Is it being printed for tangible distribution?
We do print, sorry, go ahead, Kathleen.
Oh, no, go on.
We do print materials to support some of the digital assets, not all the time, of course, like we wouldn't, you know, for a video, but we do support most of the programs where we have liaisons dedicated with printed material for them to leave behind or to hand out. We have been playing a lot more with QR codes like you see on the screen. So download or view the video, you know, go to the website, that kind of thing. So we'll add that to the printed piece to make sure that they also have accessibility to our digital assets.
Yeah, I just say we do flyers that are easy to produce, that can be quick printed at Kinko's, so that if a change needs to be made, you're not waiting 6 weeks for anything. Our liaisons distribute a lot of the flyers digitally, so they will go into an office, they'll visit a physician, they'll leave it behind, then they'll send it digitally. And we find that the physicians will actually print it out for patients when they refer a patient to one of our docs. And then the QR code has become more popular.
Excellent. Thank you, ladies. And that's all the time we have for questions. There are many more in the chat, so we're going to make sure that we have somebody following up with everybody that asks the individual questions and get you guys those answers. I'm going to turn it over to Daniel.
Thank you, Stacy. I'm sure the audience joins me in thanking you, Kathleen and Azmina, for that terrific discussion. And thank you for everyone in our audience for taking the time to join us today. Please note that if you asked a question, like Stacy just alluded to, and we weren't able to get you an answer, we'll do our best to get a response to you as soon as we can. We'll also be sending out a link to the webinar recording, so watch out for that in the next few days. That concludes today's program. We hope to see you at future forum webinars, and mark your calendar for the Healthcare Marketing and Physician Strategy Summit, May 4th to 6th, 2026 in Salt Lake City. Please visit the forum website at healthcarestrategy.com to learn more. Finally, be sure to give us your feedback by completing the evaluation survey as you exit the webinar. Thank you and have a great day.